Catastrophic thinking is a key to planning policies, and the key to successfully planning policies is to think about the worst case scenario. Have a mindset based on the illusion of equilibrium. We've lived in a temporary good times, stable times, equilibrium, sea levels. They haven't always been the current sea level just for the last 5,000 years. But way before that, it was a lot lower during the periods of the ice ages, a lot higher during the periods of the dinosaurs. Carbon dioxide levels for the last 5,000 years has been 280 parts per million until about 20 years ago we started inflating it. But that's not the norm. The norm is something much higher or lower. We talk about ice ages in the distant past, geomagnetic poles, where the compass is always pointing north, plentiful resources like water and oil, peace, like Pax Americana here in the U.S. at least, and the economic stability. We have little recessions now and then, but not much. Reality is totally different. Sea levels are due to rise due to global warming. Not only is it increasing the thermal reserves in the oceans, causing them to expand, but then there's a sudden bursts like the melting of the Doomsday Glacier in Antarctica or the melting of Greenland occurring right now. Carbon dioxide is rising and heating the earth. The ice age is overdue since the Little Ice Age in the medieval times. We were fortuitous for inadvertently averting the ice age for a while at least, although it's overdue, by industrial revolution and pollution and raising the temperatures that way to keep us from falling into the Little Ice Age. Magnetic Pole Switch. One of my favorite books is Pole Shift by John White. He's got it on page 195. He's got it right in that the poles do shift because the Earth is a dynamo, a molten ball with a thin crust on it, and the ball is constantly churning. And we have, from geological records, been able to establish that it switches 2.2 times every million years. And there's a lot of panic out there that this is going to cause the end of life as we know. It's going to affect the Van Allen belts, whatever, that surround the Earth and protect it from solar radiation. That's not true. The dinosaurs lived for millions of years and went through many, many, many polar shifts. And so we can survive too, although we might have to go underground and come out only at nights. Aquifer depletion is an example of shortages. It's coming up, and we don't want to face up to it. And although we are a civilization, really a civilization of continuous war, there's always a war in Africa or Asia someplace. So essential concepts in policy formation, in catastrophic thinking: identify strategic assets. Identify the systemic vulnerabilities within those strategic assets. And third, identify bubbles. Now, bubbles doesn't appear on my chart because a bubble is a catastrophe waiting to happen. Bubble bursts. Funding, listed here, is essential, and we have to develop policies with built-in resilience and sustainability. All of these are problems associated with the federal deficit, as we will see in this and the next video. Well, what could go wrong? What are the bubbles out there? Y2K38 will happen in the year 2038. Will happen, notice. It's a catastrophe certain to happen because we don't have the 60-some bit chips that we should. We have too many 32-bit chips. PSA 2 is EMPs. We're constantly reminded of the dangers from our sun in the form of the northern lights, which have been pretty extensive lately. In 1859, they wiped out the electronic grid, which wasn't much back then. It will happen again. Freshwater shortages, aquifers are being depleted, sea levels, the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica is going to collapse into the ocean and raise the sea levels. A year without a summer is a volcano in 1816 that caused the world to cool for a year, and that resulted in famine. We have that coming up. And PSA number 5, a financial collapse due to deficits. We'll look at that. The geomagnetic pole switch. If you don't believe it, I encourage you to look at this book, Reversals of Earth's Magnetic Field by Jacobs. Very good book. A little technical, but if you want the proof, it's out there. And like I say, it happens all the time, geologically speaking. 2.2 times per million years. And we're way overdue for one. Global warming or ice age, either way. Ironically, if we solve global warming, that'll plunge us into an ice age. Pandemics like a Black Death could do a whole problem. But the real thing about catastrophic thinking is we need to plan our policies to avoid any catastrophe. It's not that something will go wrong. It's not which one, but something. Many things can trigger a catastrophe. We just went through the list. We need to identify systemic vulnerabilities built into our policies and correct them. The best indicator of catastrophes is the bubble. I've got the bubble literature, some of it here, much more is in my references at the front. Bubbles can be commodities like tulips, food, and Bitcoin, demographics like aging population, inputs like oil, fertilizer, and water becoming short. It's a reverse bubble. There isn't enough of it. Economic like credit, financial market, panic and fear, illusory information, and then occurring naturally. The causes of bubbles are many. They include leverage, emotions like fear, panic, and frenzies, speculation, greed, exuberance, monopolies, technology, pumping water. Irrigation, surprisingly, is a bubble because we're living off of a non-sustainable irrigation of food. Evil, very common. We got Ponzi schemes, conspiracies, criminal ideas, government regulation, tax and spending, which might be included in that topic, evil. Lack of checks and balances, audit and review, demographic trends like aging. Systemic vulnerabilities are predictors of catastrophes when they become unsustainable. The bubble bursts. We're faced with a crisis. And how can you tell? How to identify bubbles? Well, you have inadequate audits and reviews that fail to point it out, or they point it out and they're ignored and criticized and smeared. Selfish interest groups protest. That's always a good sign that there's a systemic vulnerability, a bubble. Pretend it doesn't exist, suppress discussion, misinformation. All of these things are happening in society today about just about everything. We have a cancel culture out there. Financial bubbles, which is where we're ultimately headed with this. Lots of causes of that. Greed, speculation, fear of missing out, FOMOs, panic, fear, terror, hubris, hunger from famine, government interference. Now, I happen to have I have many good books. Famous First Bubbles covers things like the tulip mania in Holland in 1636 and around there. Tulips became more expensive than homes, tulip bulbs, and they became a form of superinflated currency like Bitcoin because they're not backed by taxation to repay them. Neither is Bitcoin. But nonetheless, I have tulips in my IRA, my self-directed IRA, and the reason for that is someday they'll come back, and when they do, I'll be rich. The South Seas Bubble is another example from Famous First Bubbles. In 1719, 1720, stock prices of the South Seas Company was a new idea to acquire Britain's debt. Sir Isaac Newton looked at it, thought it was sound. Now remember, Sir Isaac Newton invented calculus. He's one of the six, because Einstein came later, one of the six greatest geniuses of all time. To, create, invent calculus. He invested in the South Seas Company. And then on April 20th, 1720, he sold out for 100% profit, making 7,000 pounds over his initial investment of 7,000 pounds. 7,000 pounds is about 2.1 million in today's dollars. But the stock kept going up for a lot longer. And later, Sir Isaac Newton would say, I can calculate the motions of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. He watched the stock price continue to climb even higher. He had a fear of missing out. He questioned his own financial acumen. He invested 20,000 pounds, about $6 million, and then the market collapsed just 2 or 3 weeks later, and Newton lost most of his investments. As Albert Einstein said, the difference between genius and stupidity is that genius has its limits. History of financial bubbles, I encourage you to look at that. This time is different. 8 Essentials of Financial Follies right here. Bubbles and crashes happen many times. We had one in 2000 called the dot-com collapse crash, and the housing crash of 2008. So and no matter what we face in the way of a bubble collapse, it's going to get worse because it's a worldwide crisis. Automatically, it's built in. The whole society and civilization is based on so many precarious elements. The biggest of which is demographics. We're aging. China's aging. Japan's aging. Europe's aging. The United States is aging. We're getting old. All the young people are mostly in Southeast Asia. There's some in India, and there's some in Latin America, but they're not here. We are an aging population. Aging is not good for when you're faced with a catastrophe because they're more vulnerable, less able to fend for themselves, less able to help with the recovery and rebuild, just more cost, more mouths to feed, more need for shelters, more medical resources. Conclusion. Catastrophe thinking is our best defense. We need to test every policy for audit process. Is it sustainable? Is there backup infrastructure in place so when the front line fails, there'll be something else to move in? Test for every possible worst case scenario, all PSAs, plus fire, plus different types of water hazards. Ask yourself what could go wrong, because you can assume it will, because it will. And then I will have key slides at the end. So thank you. Support my efforts to become essential. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Under construction, the essential websites. EssentialConceptsInc.com is my website. Please share, especially reference or refer to this YouTube channel, but give credit. There it is. Caveat mind, essential concepts. And I will end every video the same way with a prayer for peace.